Hello guys and welcome back to FATBOSS TV. Today we're having a look at another boss in Castle Nathria with a Huntsman Altimor.
Yes, this encounter is nice and early in the instance and was probably the easiest boss that we tested over the months of raid testing that we did. That said, there are a few key mechanics with this fight that are potentially very deadly if done wrong, so it's not a complete cakewalk. But with that out of the way, let's jump straight in.
So the boss himself only has two mechanics to deal with. Sinseeker is a mark on 3 random players with an arrow from the boss facing towards them. Shortly afterwards, a bolt is sent towards those players, dealing a burst of damage to all players within its path, as well as applying a dot. And this projectile will continue to travel after it's hit the player until it eventually hits the wall. While testing, we found this projectile to be quite wide and had melee often get clipped by accident by ranged players that were targeted. So to fix this, we simply decided to have melee stood on one side of the boss at all times and range spread on the other side, and that would almost completely remove the chance that people are randomly clipped. Having the camp split and slightly spread also helps with the spread shot. This ability is frequently cast and deals a large amount of burst damage instantly in a large unavoidable cone targeted at a random player. So being spread takes some pressure off your healers and makes it far more manageable. So next to mention is the pets. The boss has 3 of them and they'll come out one by one as the previous one dies. The order is set and is guaranteed to happen as the damage that the boss and the pets take is shared, so eventually the pets will die even if you don't directly attack them. The first pet is Margore. He'll apply a stacking physical dot on the tanks. You'll just want to make sure that you taunt swap the moment the debuff drops, but more importantly he'll cast Vicious Lunge on a random target. After the cast he'll jump on a player doing lethal damage to them, however this damage is split between all players within 6 yards of them. So you'll want a selection of your raid to help soak up the damage to make it survivable. However, you don't want to send in too many players because everyone hit also receives a dot. When testing we found anywhere between 3 to 4 players was more than enough. Now once Margore is dead, Bargast will come out next.
Now for the healers and tanks to watch out for is his Rip Soul cast. This will deal a burst of magic damage to the tank and then spawn a healable ad that will travel towards the boss. If this ad reaches the boss will gain a huge damage increase for a minute and you'll likely wipe. So you need to heal this ad to full to despawn it before it manages to get close to the boss. Whilst the ad is active, it will also be dealing pretty high raid-wide damage. Now the health this ad spawns with is based on the percentage of the health the tank had immediately after the cast. So as an example, if the tank is shielded up and used cooldowns and is at 100% after the cast, the ad will just instantly despawn. So healers, you really want to keep a very close eye on tank health when this pet is active, and you want to use some sort of DR each time this ability is cast. And, as a safety precaution, tanks should move the ad and the boss apart just before the cast, just to guarantee that if the ad does spawn, it doesn't instantly run into the boss. It gives your healers some time to top it up. Now aside from that, Bargast will occasionally spawn 2 Shade of Bargast ads on either side of him. These ads will spam cast Deathly Roar, an uninterruptible cast that will wipe you very shortly after its cast because it applies a horrible dot. Now fortunately, these shades can be crowd controlled, allowing you to interrupt the ability. Whilst crowd controlled, they also gain stacks of Destabilize, increasing the damage they take by 100%, and this does stack up very quickly and it doesn't seem to have a limit apart from 99, and whilst testing, multiple stacks of Destabilize would be applied if they're under multiple unique crowd control effects. So we decided just to drag Bargast away from the raid just before these ads spawns to make sure that we're not going to break the CC that spawns on them because we're cleaving underneath the boss. And once the ads had spawned, we just had a bunch of people just spam a shit ton of CC all over them. Once they've got around at least 30 stacks or so, sometimes we did a little bit more just for fun, but at least 30 stacks, at that point everyone switched to them and annihilated them. Of course they will still be casting their Deathly Roar, so you might need to still reapply CC here and there just to make sure that you reset their cast timer. Now one last thing about these ads is that they do gain energy over time, and at 100% energy they will be immune to all crowd control, so you really can't leave this too late. They should be looking at getting damaged around the 70% energy mark at the latest. Either way, once you've dealt with Bargast, Hecutis will enter. This guy will debuff random players with Petrifying Howl. When this debuff expires, it spawns a large zone underneath you that deals ticking damage to all players within, so we opted to drop these on the walls of the room to maximise the space you have. They didn't appear to despawn, so by the end of the fight you could potentially have a pretty small area to fight in. Now the main thing you need to watch out for on this pet is his stacking debuff. Whenever he hits the tanks, he'll gain a stack of 50% increased physical damage, and he already hits pretty hard, so this becomes a big problem. However, each time this pet moves, he'll shred a stack of this debuff, whilst also doing raid-wide damage for each stack dropped. So you'll want to move him around to drop his stacks, but doing it in such a way that the high incoming damage doesn't overlap with either a spread shot or a Sin Seeker from the Huntsman, as you could potentially look at making a combo which might one-shot someone. But of course you can't leave it so late that the stacks on Hecutis become so high that the tank becomes one-shot. We found that this particular point was a really good time to use healing cooldowns. As long as the tanks and healers communicate, I want to drop my stacks, and healers just get ready for it, it wasn't too difficult to deal with. But once you manage to get Hecutis down, you'll just have Huntsman on very low health by himself. It's a bit sad really, and you can just finish him off.
As for the Mythic version of this encounter, instead of just adding new pets or giving the pets additional mechanics, they simply just made Sin Seeker gain permanent empowerments for each pet that spawns, making it ridiculously strong towards the end of the fight. Margore makes it so the bolt deals lethal damage to a single player, however this damage is split between all players along its path. While testing we found that 2 additional players in each was a good call. As for Bargast, he makes it so each player that is hit by the bolt will also spawn one of the healing adds that will travel towards the boss, just like the Rip Soul cast on the tank, and since so many players are hit, healers have to be real shit hot at covering all of them, and it's not uncommon for the tanks to be in a position where they actually have to move the boss away from the adds because it's so easy to miss them as a healer. And finally, Hecutis just makes it so all players also do splash damage when they are hit. So stacking within them is no longer a possibility, making the healing adds even more difficult to deal with because you can no longer AoE heal them. But aside from that, the fight is exactly the same. That's the encounter. What are our thoughts?
So yeah, it's actually very well made. It's one of the fights that kind of felt complete and polished.
Yeah.
One voice concerned by many people in and outside of our raid team was that it kind of just felt a little bit too easy, even on Mythic. And I kind of agree with that. It is a very chill boss to kind of deal with. But I wouldn't really necessarily say it's a mechanical issue. There is quite a lot going on in the fight, especially because you can go to him so early in the instance. I just think some of the abilities need a few tweaks just to make certain things have a bit more impact, such as that first pet with Margore when he lunges on someone. It feels like such a non-mechanic. You just lob some people who happen to be nearby, or even you could immune it, or just use a large DR, which was enough to survive it as well. So it kind of felt like that first pet was kind of a bit of a non-pet. It was something for the tanks to deal with and everyone else just sitting there nuking the boss. And it kind of carries over to Bargast a little bit as well, because that Rip Soul cast on the tank, if you mitigate it completely, like a large section of that entire mechanic is just gone. That ad just spawns and instantly despawns. It doesn't do any ticks of raid damage, and that raid damage, if it goes through, is incredibly high. So I'm not sure if they really want you just to remove that ad entirely or not, because right now, if you let it go through, chances are you're going to have a real tough time trying to keep both the raid healthy and trying to top that ad up in time.
I mean, in the situations where we did mess it up, we did almost wipe every single time.
Yeah.
But I think it'd be more interesting if the ad was almost guaranteed to spawn every single time, because the fact that it just doesn't exist if you shield the tank and he uses a DR, I think that's kind of boring personally. I think having the ad spawn and the healers actually have to actively go and heal it, but the raid damage it deals maybe isn't as significant. Perhaps it speeds up over time, so you can't just ignore it forever and out-heal the incoming raid damage. Something like that is more interesting than, oh, it just didn't spawn because you have a good Disc Priest in your raid.
I think it's still cool that if the tank plays well and your healers play well, that you can make it so this, ad has much less health that you need to heal up. So I think that's a cool mechanic. They should probably, reward players for playing well, especially the classes that don't always get to see that, such as tanks and healers. Sometimes you don't really get that reward. And this mechanic, if you do it well, it's just like, that's it, it's gone.
What if the ad always spawns at 1% health regardless, and the percentage health of your tank affects its movement speed?
Oh, that's spicy.
So if your tank goes to 1% health on the cast, then it's like Usain Bolt super fast sprinting towards the boss.
Maybe you could just make it so it's the percent, maybe it has like a percent healing taken buff. So like, you could increase the healing taken based on the tank's health. I don't know. We're probably making it too complicated at this point.
But something could happen. I think it could be better. Also to mention for the last ad, I guess, is the Petrifying Howl debuffs. I feel like if the circle from them was slightly bigger, or just more players got hit by the debuff, I think that would make the fight better. It's really hard to say because of tuning.
Yeah.
But in that last phase, it just didn't feel like you were running out of space. And considering those circles appear to last forever, you would like to think that maybe they'd make the end of the encounter, at least on Mythic, slightly hectic, where you are starting to worry about your space, where you are trying to just DPS as much as you possibly can to kill the boss before you run out of space. But things along those lines, with all those 3 pets, I think would definitely improve the fight. However, they was to do absolutely nothing with this encounter is more than decent enough in its current state, and I wouldn't be disappointed to see it as it is on live servers. But anyway, guys, thanks for watching. That's all we have time for. As always, we'll have an updated guide for this on Wowhead as well as on the channel, and a link for both of those will be down in the description, so make sure you keep an eye on that. And we will see you all in the next one.
Thanks for watching.